Hello, DCAC members. This is Jake with a program participation report that we'll be discussing at our upcoming DCAC meeting on March 22nd, 2021. This report looks at multiple areas, including our Gifted and Talented program, advanced options at the middle level, our activities and athletics program, as well as students that are participating in special education. So these four areas, we are looking at the data within these to see who's participating in their programs by race, and also to find different areas that are over or underrepresented. The first one that we'll start off with is our gifted and talented data. And the data on the following slide shows students that are formally identified in grades 3 through 12. We also do identify students informally in K2. They're not represented in the data. And just a heads up that when we look at the data, we're looking at over and under representation. And so we're looking at the proportionate number to be a 1.0, which is what we use to identify whether they're over or under identified. So you'll see that in this next slide here. So the different groups that we're looking at, and you can see the different colors over here of the different groups. The first one in blue is American Indian, Alaska Native. Red here is Asian Pacific Islander. Green is Hispanic. The purple is Black students. Turquoise is white students. Multiracial students are in orange. EL students in that light blue. Students that are that qualify for free or reduced priced meals, FRP, is in that pinkish. And our special ed students are in that light green. And you can see where each of those, their data points are. Again, we're looking for a 1.0 would be representative of that population within our program. And you can see the data goes across the bottom of that table, and I lost my cursor, here it is. So you can see all of those data points from 2016-17 to 2019-20. And within that data, you can see that white students remain overrepresented in our gifted and talented program. They're overrepresented by at least 1.5 times of their proportionate population. And we did see increases in both of our American Indian and multiracial student groups. But we have a lot of work to continue to do within our English learners group. At our meeting on Monday, we'll have a chance to discuss some of the revisioning plans that we have for our GATE students, our gifted and talented education, which is what GATE stands for, with a move towards a vision of talent development and advanced academics. And we look forward to getting more of your input and ideas for changing and reimagining what our GATE program can be to be more equitable and anti-racist. We also look at our advanced options, and the advanced options, or AOs as we call them because we have to make everything into an acronym, are offered to our students in 7th and 8th grade, and they are assignments that provide some more depth and complexity. They're either a separate assignment or an extension to an assignment, or something that's completely different for our students to choose. And they began in the areas of English and science back in 2016, and we continue to expand them. We have a social studies pilot that's currently happening, and we're hoping to have some wider implementation for social studies in next school year, starting in the fall of 2021. We're also with our RAMS, that Math 7, which is that new course that we proposed and approved a few months ago. Will also be begin with some advanced options for next school year. And so the following data in the slide is looking at those students who at least completed one advanced option in their 7th or 8th grade school year. And so this is actually looking at 3 years of data. And a reminder, you probably don't need a reminder, but just that 2019-2020 data is the most recent data that we're looking at. So we're looking back at last year. And again, that school year obviously was interrupted through the pandemic. So the data from the 2019-2020 includes an asterisk on it. So you can see that at the bottom of the screen. and that it just changed as our students moved into distance learning in trimester 3. So again, we have our student groups that are at the bottom: American Indian, Alaska Native, Asian Pacific Islander, Hispanic, Black, White, students of color, and multiracial. The multiracial group is a new, it's not a new group, but we added that as a group that we're going to monitor. That is a group that that has expanded from from the Minnesota Department of Education that they're reporting now, and so we are also going to be continuing to report that as well. We did keep a group that we just titled Students of Color, and that is a group that includes all of our students of color groups within there, and that has been a group that we use as a comparison over the years. And you actually really need to look at that group and disaggregate it, because if we just put students of color, it would look like, oh, we're doing very well with all of our student groups, but it is very different. You can see within all of those different groups, with our Black and Hispanic students being below that 0.9 number at like around that 0.7, Asian Pacific Islanders at that 0.1, and then multiracial students being way above. So it's good to make sure that we're looking at how our different groups are comparing. We also look at our activities, and activities are focused on 4 different categories, and it's only focused on grades 7 through 12. So our activities are grouped into 4 different categories: those academic groups, athletic groups, clubs, and fine arts. And you can see some of the examples in the slide there. Looking at our secondary activities, this is kind of the summary of where those play out. So most of our students were in the athletics, so 46%, followed by fine arts and 27%, and then academics and then clubs are around 11% and 16% relatively. And some of these groups, like, you can actually, it's hard to classify because they fall in almost all 3 of the areas of academic or a fine art or a club. So they could probably fit into multiple areas. This is actually just a word collage, or some different clubs and activities and fine arts groups and academic groups that we have here. So you can see all the different things that we offer within our 712. And again, know that some of these weren't able to be continued through the pandemic, but some of them have been on hold. And some have been able to meet during the pandemic and found a way to do that virtually, or some of them obviously in person with meeting our COVID-19 guidelines. So again, we're looking at that over and under representation. Again, that 1.0 is where we would say that group is represented completely, where we would want them to be. They are exactly where they need to be at that 1.0. And again, we have our different student groups on the side here: American Indian, Alaska Native, Asian Pacific Islander, and the rest of them you can read. EL means English learners. FRP again is students who qualify for free and reduced price meals, and SPED is our special education students. So in looking at our data, we find that with our 3-year trend, there's a significant disruption in trimester 3 of that 2019-2020 school year with the pandemic. And it is difficult to compare the previous 2 years with 2019-2020 because of the cancellation of activities last year. Also, we did add that multiracial group of students as a category to be more inclusive, and that changes some of the percentages of our students groups by race, which could involve some decreases in that American Indian and Hispanic students that we saw over that last year. And then the students of color group overall includes American Indian students, Asian students, Black students, Hispanic students, and multiracial students. And I just left that number in there from past because it's been a consistent marker to allow some comparison over the years. And again, it is good to break that down to see where those different student groups are. So moving on to our initial referrals for special education. And within this category, we've looked for initial referrals who are students who've met that initial criteria to be evaluated for special education. And those students may or may not qualify for specialized services in special education. They may or may not be evaluated based on that initial referral. It might be something that they say that there's still more interventions that could be put in place for that student. So this data is actually used to monitor that overrepresentation or underrepresentation of student groups for special education. So again, we have our student groups onto that left side, same as they have been in the other categories. And you can see in the data that we find that in 2019-2020, most of our student groups were more representative than the previous year, which was 2018-2019. Our Black student referrals continued to decrease from 2 years ago, that 2017-2018 school year. We also saw an increase in Asian student referrals towards a more proportionate amount. This year we added the multiracial students, which does impact some of our direct comparisons by student groups to past years. And again, the all students group remains that stable over time, but doesn't show that significant variance that happens between our student groups by race, which can sometimes be a little bit misleading. And which is why we include each of our student groups by race. So this is looking at this last section of participation of students that are actually served in special education. Those that have been already identified for special education services. So the first slide, that first section we saw was students who had been referred, and these are actually students who are in special education that are being served within there. So again, looking at our data, we do see that our students of color, that group, overall shows that proportionate amount of students served in special education. However, there is a lot of variance within our student groups by race. We see that our American Indian students were overrepresented last year in special education, whereas our Asian students were underrepresented. Our multiracial students continue to be overrepresented in the data, but declined from previous years. And it is also important to continue to monitor our student groups to see where our actions should be focused. So I want to thank you for watching, and we will have time for questions and discussion at our meeting on Monday.